All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a really fascinating and honestly kind of mind-bending symbolic worldview from the thinker Matthieu Pageau. We're going to explore an idea that completely reframes one of the most powerful symbols in Western culture. And it all kicks off with this really provocative question that Pageau asks. What if Satan wasn't just some purely evil being, but a necessary, even divinely created function in the universe? You know, like a job that has to be done? Yeah, it's a pretty wild idea. So let's unpack it. Okay, so to really get this, we've got to start with the two basic building blocks of reality in this symbolic framework. It's a really simple but powerful distinction that you'll see sets the stage for everything else. First up, there is what Pageau calls heaven. Now, this is not the place with clouds and harps. Think of it more like the plan, the purpose, or the meaning for something. It's kind of like the architect's blueprint for a house. It's the idea that gives form and structure to raw potential. And then, of course, you've got Earth. This is the other half of the equation. This represents the raw material, all that potential, the power that the plan, the heaven, gives meaning to. So if heaven is the blueprint, Earth is all the lumber, the concrete, the wiring that gets organized into a home. But here's the catch. A world that just has a plan and the materials to build it is totally static. It's finished. A blueprint and a pile of lumber don't just get better on their own. Any system that can't change, well, it eventually becomes outdated, corrupt, and super brittle. So clearly something else is needed. And that something is this dynamic principle of renewal. I mean, think about it. How does any system, whether it's a government, a piece of software, or even our own personal habits, how does it actually improve? So how does that work in the real world? It's not magic, right? It's a very specific mechanism that has to push against the way things are right now in order to force them to get better. So in this way of looking at things, improvement happens through a constant process of testing and criticism. And this isn't about mindless destruction. It's a function that's specifically designed to find the weak points, the bugs, and all the blind spots so that they can be fixed. Pageau actually breaks this whole renewal thing down into 3 different jobs. First, you've got cleaning. This is about getting rid of all the errors and corruption that have crept into the system. Then there's testing. You got to poke and prod the system to make sure it's still strong and working right. And finally, all of that leads to improving, which means making the system even better and more advanced than it was before. And this right here is where we circle back to that central mystery, Satan. Because this entire framework makes a critical distinction between a necessary function and what happens when that function gets corrupted. What Pageau argues is that Satan, in its original unfallen state, is basically the ultimate internal critic, a function that God himself created. Its entire purpose isn't to destroy the system, but to make it stronger by relentlessly pointing out every single one of its weaknesses. So this job has a 3-part description. First, to be the tester, to probe the system for bugs. Second, to be the tempter, to see if the people using the system will break the rules, because that reveals vulnerabilities. And third, to be the accuser, to call out the flaws it finds so they can actually be fixed. The best modern analogy for this is what we call an ethical hacker. You literally hire this person to try and break into your own software. Their job is to think like the enemy, to find every single flaw and loophole, not to destroy you, but so you can patch those holes and make your entire system way more secure. But we all know how the story usually goes, right? What's the real difference between that ethical hacker and a malicious one? Between a helpful tester and an outright traitor? At what point does this vital function become fallen and truly evil? Well, corruption happens when the critic starts to misuse the very power it was given. It's like a police officer who gets the authority to investigate crimes, but then uses those same tools to harass a neighbor for personal reasons. By ignoring the rules it's supposed to uphold, the function becomes fallen. It starts using its power for itself, not for the good of the system. So it really all boils down to one thing: motive. The functional critic, our ethical hacker, acts in service to the system. They find a flaw and they report it so it can be fixed. But the fallen adversary, the blackmailer, finds that exact same flaw and uses it for personal gain, for what Pageau calls a will to power. They don't want to fix the system. They want to win, to control, to dominate it. Now, you might be thinking this is all just some abstract theological idea. But Pageau presents this as a really practical, symbolic lens that we can use to look at the world around us, and even to look inside our own heads. And why does it matter? Well, because this framework gives us a super powerful tool to tell the difference between criticism that builds things up and attacks that are just designed to tear things down. It helps us spot the difference between a helpful challenge and a sneaky power play.
And you can start to see this pattern everywhere once you know what to look for. Is the person criticizing the company genuinely trying to improve it, or are they just trying to seize control for themselves? Is your own inner voice pointing out a real flaw so you can grow, or is it just trying to tear you down? See, the fallen critic wants to win. The functional one wants the system to win. So take this lens with you and just look around. At work, in politics, even in your own internal monologue. Where do you see a functional critic working hard to improve the system? And where do you see a fallen adversary that's just driven by a will to power? Learning to tell the difference between those two faces, it might just change how you see everything.